Shalom. Poetry is rarely used in the Torah. In the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, we know, of course, of Shirat Hayam, a small section on Shirat HaBe'er in Bamidbar. A little bit about Bilam. Moshe says one line of poetry about Miriam, and our Parsha, Parshat Haazinu. And the question is, if poetry is such a beautiful medium, why isn't it used more? Why isn't it more utilized in our Chumash? We know it's in Sifrei Emet, in Shir HaShirim, in Mishlei, in Tehillim, in Nivuah as well. It's there often. But in Chamisha Chumshei Torah, we rarely see it. I think the answer is because while poetry is beautiful, while poetry lifts up our spirits, it's also obfuscating. It's complicated. It's confusing, and it's kind of making us not understand the clarity of the message. And with Chumash, the clarity of the message is paramount. Chumash is trying to convey, on the one hand, it's a set of laws. Laws need to be black and white. Laws need to be understood and not a picture, an idea, a message. It has to be very, very concrete. At the same time, Chumash is there to teach us about the Mesorah, to teach us about our Avot, to teach us about our destiny as a people. Once again, with Chumash, when it's trying to do these things, poetry kind of can be interpreted in many different ways. And therefore, when it comes to the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, it's rarely used because we need clarity, we need a message, we need to understand the content, and we need to make sure that there's absolute clarity in the picture of what's being represented. Well, if that's the case, then why do we have poetry? Why is there Shirat Hayam? Why all of a sudden, in the middle of Sefer Shemot, does Moshe wax poetic? Ashir el Hashem kigoga, susver, biblical parallelism, biblical poetry, and it goes all the way through the entire Parshat. And it's speckled throughout other areas in the Torah. What is it doing there? And then ultimately, what's it doing in Parshat Haazinu? Well, the answer is that while poetry has certain, disadvantages, or it's, makes certain sacrifices in terms of the clarity and the message, it also has wonderful, amazing advantages. But poetry brings us to a place that words were not able to get to. And therefore, in Shirat Hayam, when you experience Masha Lo Ra'ah Yechezkel Ben Buz, when one experienced the hand of God, there were no words that could contain this message. Rather, a song was needed. Because poetry is an expression of your heart. It is sometimes the storm, but sometimes the joy of your emotions that overflow and then come out into an expression that is melodic, is beautiful, has rhythm, has a feeling that kind of gets you swept up into it. And therefore, for Shirat Hayam and later for the Shirat HaBe'er, in a smaller sense, there was no other terms of a medium that was able to express their moment of Nisei Nisim, of seeing God's hand right there for them. And therefore, Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael. That makes sense for Parshat B'Shalach. And it makes sense for the Shirat HaBe'er. But what about Parshat Haazinu? Why at the end of Moshe's life does all of a sudden he wax poetic? And it's very complicated. Haazinu Hashamayim, V'adaber, V'tishma Aretz, Mirfi. We don't understand the words. After that, we struggle with some of the poetic motifs. What is Moshe trying to accomplish in Parshat Haazinu that leaves us with this poetic work? I think the message that Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to convey, after the Devarim, he spends an entire Sefer on Devarim, and those Devarim, those words, are black and white. Those words are very straightforward. They're very, very concrete. Moshe tells them over and over again, Shema Yisrael, listen to the words I'm saying to you. But something is happening as the sun is setting on Moshe's life. And Moshe has these nivuot, And he realizes that, unfortunately, Am Yisrael, and Hashem tells him, Am Yisrael, after Moshe's demise, will fall. They'll falter. They will sin. Moshe is struggling how to deal with this and how to convey this information to Am Yisrael. So he chooses the medium of a poem. He chooses Haazinu to make it poetry for the other aspect that poetry was fundamentally important in ancient times, until Gutenberg, until the printing press. You see, in ancient times, they didn't have books. And therefore, when they told them information, it had to be written down by scribes, and some scribes had it, and the rest of the people, they just didn't understand it. But a poem, a song, that could be committed to memory. That could become part of people. Moshe Rabbeinu wants Bnei Yisrael, if they're going to remember one thing, remember this song. What is the song about? The song is about the frailty and the fallibility of human beings, about Am Yisrael, but also about the ultimate consoling level that Hashem will always be with them. Sometimes through punishment, because Avita Kasita Shamanta. But always at the end, Hashem will be there for that consoling, for that consolation. And therefore, the last words of V'chiper admato amo is what Moshe is trying to convey to them. I'm leaving. You won't have a Moshe Rabbeinu, but you will have this song. The song will remind you of your humanness, and at the same time remind you that you're chelik Elohim Imal, that you're part of this great, that you're part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you have the capacity to come back to Him. You have the capacity to do teshuvah. So all of Am Yisrael will keep this message and hold on to it, and they will sing this song. And they will continue to have this song with them through the difficulties, through the persecutions, through the galut, and ultimately through their return to Eretz Yisrael. With this, Moshe is kind of saying this one last message. Before you get to the V'zot HaBracha, he gives his one last song. A song that Bnei Yisrael will commit to memory, will sing at times of sadness, but will also hold on to them at times of joy. And that, I believe, is the message of Parshat Haazinu.